Welcome back. Good to see you today. Kansas City Chiefs 2020 off-season. We have so much to talk about today. I don't know how long this video is going to be, but you'll see it when we put the time up there. There is so much to cover. I'm going to start off with what you did last year and what you look like on offense and defense and overall. Then we're going to move to the cap space that you have and where that number comes from. We'll look very quickly at the team needs, where you're strong and weak at. We'll move over here. We'll look at each of these free agents individually. Then we'll look at some cap savings options you may or could not do if you need it. Then we'll go back through and look at what some of these things mean in the big picture, not only for 2020, but oh, by the way, we want to win in 2021 and 22 as well. So things that we do this season with these guys here and these guys here and maybe restructures, they affect what we do in 21 and 22 as well. So we got a lot to look through today. Thank you for being on board. I want to start right here. 2019, what'd you do? All you did was 12-4, win a Super Bowl, not too shabby. Coming off of that, if we want to bring everybody back, and those of you who are Chiefs fans may have already seen these other videos, I've alluded to it. If we want to just bring everybody back, roll out the football and let's go at it. We'll see if the rest of the NFL caught up to us. Yes, we could do that. Take some maneuver. We'd have to push and pull some things around. It would almost automatically mean a backloaded Chris Jones contract. But you could do that if you wanted to. The problem with that is that doesn't put you in a good financial position for 2021 or 2022. It also runs the risk of, the rest of the NFL is trying to catch up to us, and Baltimore could do that, or San Francisco could do that, or maybe the Raiders really do a surprise move and get better very quickly, or maybe Tennessee finds a better quarterback. You never know what the rest of the NFL is going to do, so you really just can't sit back and bring back the same roster, even though financially that is something they could do with a lot of pulling and a little bit of maneuvering here and there. So great season last year. Specifically, offense and defense, how'd you do? The rankings on offense, number 5 and number 6, could have been better if you hadn't had the injuries on the offensive line throughout the season. That really hinders an offense. Also, these numbers are suppressed because Patrick Mahomes missed some time as well. So really, in essence, when you look at the talent on the offensive roster for Kansas City, nobody else would want to give up the Kansas City roster in order to get somebody else's roster. So even though they're ranked number 5 and number 6 in points per game and yards per game overall last year, had a great offense, that you could make the argument that they very well had the best offense in football last year. Certainly anybody would rather have Mahomes than just about anybody else at quarterback in the NFL last year. Anybody else would rather have Tyreek Hill at wide receiver than whatever wide receiver they may have lined up with. When you look at the overall roster on the offensive side of football for Kansas City, I think certainly you can make the argument that even though they were number 5 and number 6, those numbers are a little suppressed because of injuries. You could very easily make the argument that they're the number 1 offense in football. On defense, it changes. There's room to improve. They made a major improvement last offseason, which was partly due to some of the changes they made in the 2018 offseason and the 2019 offseason combined. So you had 2 seasons of work they put in there to get them from being one of the worst defenses in football to points per game, number 7 overall in the NFL last year, and yards per game, number 17 overall last year. So major improvement. It fueled their trip all the way through to the Super Bowl. Really helped Patrick Mahomes take the pressure off of him and off the offense, knowing that they had a defense that could do things, and you saw that especially in the points per game improvement, number 7 overall in the NFL. Still room to improve in the yards per game area. There's still places that you can get better on defense, but considering how good you are on offense, it's not a stress out point anymore. You're not worried about, man, is the defense going to drag us into another playoff loss like it has over the past couple of seasons. You now know that you have a defense that can at least hold its own, and in some cases, even at the tail end of last season, we saw it do even better than that. So that's what you're looking at overall. Cap space, how we doing? It's tight. $16 million. Now, this number here, we are right on the brink of the NFL offseason starting, and that number is going to change on an almost daily basis due to the free agents, due to restructures, due to people getting released or traded, due to the draft picks coming in. This number is going to be like the stock market numbers. It's going to fluctuate up and down almost daily for the next 2 or 3 months. But for right now, $16 million is a pretty solid, consistent number to be looking at when you're asking the question, How much cap space does Kansas City have? Those of you who listen to radio and TV, you're going to hear a lot of different cap numbers thrown out there. This is a very, very representative number. Let me explain it. $16 million. That includes Eric Berry's $8 million dead cap hit from where you released him last offseason. They were able to split that. It was actually, I think, a $16 million cap hit. They were able to split that over 2 off seasons. So it took an $8 million dead last year and $8 million dead this year. That's already included in $16 million. It also already includes, and I had somebody ask me this a few months ago, it already includes the rollover cap from 2019. I think there was $23 million that Kansas City didn't use at all last offseason. Just didn't need it throughout the course of 2019. That is able to spill over into your 2020 cap figures, and you're going to need every bit of it. Even after that, after the $8 million dead cap Eric Berry hit and the $23 million rollover from 2019 that you didn't use, you have $16 million. Now, that doesn't include your draft picks that you've got to sign here in a few weeks, a couple of months, whenever you get around to signing them. They're going to cost you probably $5-6 million, depending on how many of them actually make the team. But keep in mind, that figure there, $16 million, does already include the top 51 players currently on your NFL roster. All the teams right now have to include the top 51. So if you think about it, you've got 6-7 draft picks coming in to that top 51. That means 6 or 7 guys that are currently in your top 51 are going to get pushed out. Those guys are going to drag about probably $600,000 each with them. So that's probably, I don't know, $3-4 million getting dragged off the roster, probably $5 or $6 million getting added too. That's a net of about $2 million. So this cap number, even after the draft picks, is probably going to sit right around $14 million. This number also includes a couple of club options that the Kansas City Chiefs have on guys. If they decide not to exercise those club options, I think that loosens up about another $4 million or so, something like that. Creates a little bit of flexibility there. So there's all kinds of different ways to arrive at how much cap space teams have. This is the most consistent way when you look at the guys who seem to know what they're talking about. $16 million is roughly the amount of space that Kansas City has to work with this off season. Who are their free agents? I put on the top 10 every team in the NFL. Every team in the NFL, every offseason has about 25 or 30 guys. Most of them are not high-dollar guys. Most of them are down in the $1 million category or less category. A few of them, the middle class, will sit up around the $5, $6, $7 million category. And then you've got the rich guys in the NFL who are going to be looking at cap numbers of anywhere from $10 million all the way up to 20 and beyond in some cases, if you've got a quarterback that you're having to talk about, which Kansas City doesn't this offseason. They don't have to worry about Mahomes until next offseason, so you've got that to consider for this year's offseason as well. So here's what they've got. We're going to start right here at the top with Chris Jones, defensive tackle, interior defensive guy. This is a guy who's solid against the run, depending on how much video you believe and who you want to listen to. He holds his own against the run, but he is an elite quarterback rusher. You talk about a guy who can get to the quarterback consistently on his own without help. So much so, and this is where I really discourage people from rolling over to the sack leaders list, which is very easy to get. And this is where the sack leaders really gets confusing and complicated and doesn't help you understand how good a player is. Chris Jones, on his own, we've seen this now not for 1 season or 2, we've seen it for 3 seasons now for sure. Chris Jones, on his own, can get to the quarterback on almost every play. Not quite every play, but almost every play. He is so good. He is so sound. He has the moves. He has the speed. He has the strength. He has everything right up the middle there to get in the quarterback's face on almost every play. But you won't find him up there at the top of the sack leaders list. He'll be down there somewhere around number 25 or 30 out of the top players in the NFL in sack leaders this year. And the reason for that is because he gets so much attention on almost every play. He's getting double teamed, sometimes even triple teamed, but you can count on it most plays in which it's a passing down you're going to see Chris Jones getting double teamed. And what that does then, it starts to allow other open doors for other players on the Chiefs roster to try to get pressure on the quarterback. But the reason that you see guys like Chris Jones and guys like Khalil Mack and their sack totals aren't way up there every season is because they get so much attention. They do get double and triple teamed, and sometimes they're even able to beat those double and triple teams. So I always caution people to be careful looking at that. When you look at the tape, you see very quickly and easily Chris Jones is, beyond doubt, beyond any dispute, an elite pass rusher. He gets pressure on the quarterback, or he makes NFL offenses use a lot of resources to put attention on him, and that in turn begins to open up doors for other guys to try to get the quarterback. They just don't get as much attention. Chris Jones, how much money is he going to be making? Well, we've already started to hear, and I think that I lose track. I think Kansas City may have already been announced that they're going to franchise Chris Jones. Probably going to sit around $15.5, $16 million if they franchise him, which is what we're hearing, and that's no surprise. This is standard operating procedure in the NFL. Anytime you have somebody this good, a contract that's going to be this large, it's a leveraging tool that the NFL has negotiated with the Players Association, and it affects the richest players in the NFL, the best players in the NFL. Chris Jones is going to be making $15.5 million if he signs that franchise tag. If I'm Chris Jones's agent, I'm going to tell Chris Jones, I really advise you getting on the field this year unless you have a full and complete contract. If I'm the agent for Chris Jones, I'm going to tell him, don't get on the field this year until you have a full contract, a full 4 or 5 year contract with $20 million a season or $22 million a season. Tough to say about Chris Jones. If he were to hit the free agent market on his own, I'm sure he'd pick up $20 to $22 million a season, no problem. Because Kansas City does have the franchise tag that they can use as leverage, and because Chris Jones slides into the interior defensive tackle position, he's not a legit true edge rusher. Because of that, you may see the numbers come down a little bit to somewhere around $16, $17, $18 million a season, depending on how much of a discount he wants to try to give Kansas City. If I'm the agent for Chris Jones, and I realize that this is the NFL and my guy can get hurt at any time and he may not ever get another chance to get another big contract, then I'm telling him to not get on the field this year until he's got that large contract, because this might be, you never know, this might be his only chance to ever get a contract that's upwhere in the neighborhood of $80 to $100 million with guaranteed money of somewhere between $50 to $70 million, depending on, again, how much discount he wants to give Kansas City or what another team's willing to offer, and how NFL guys view a defensive tackle who can get pressure on the quarterback versus an edge rusher. Myself, I'd be just as happy with a guy who can get pressure on the quarterback from the middle as I would anybody coming in off the edge. But not all NFL guys look at it that way. Needless to say, he's going to be making a lot of money. He doesn't want to sign the franchise tag. No player would, of course, but the NFL has that. They've collectively bargained that. And so if you're Kansas City, yeah, I'd love to bring him in on a franchise tag or use that as leverage to get him in here on a cheaper deal, a discount kind of a deal. Now, if I'm Chris Jones' agent, my leverage is this, that Kansas City knows they're in the last year, the final year of Patrick Mahomes' rookie contract. Kansas City knows they won a Super Bowl last year, and even though they're going to be able to keep Patrick Mahomes for years and years and years, the numbers are about to change. He's about to sign a contract for $35, $40 million a season. And my level of difficulty starting in 2021, or maybe more realistically 2022, depending on whether or not we backload the contract, is going to get way more difficult for me to compete for Super Bowls because I'm giving so much money to Patrick Mahomes. So this is my last shot here to compete for a Super Bowl with a very good roster, with Patrick Mahomes making really peanuts this year on his rookie deal. The time is now, and the Chiefs have already shown a willingness to be aggressive with that. If I'm Chris Jones's agent, I'm going to use that as leverage to try to pressure the Chiefs to either trade me to a team who will give me the contract I want, or to go ahead and step up and give me the contract I want. That way I've got the guaranteed money. I don't have to worry anymore if I'm Chris Jones or if I'm Chris Jones's family, I don't have to worry anymore about getting injured because I've already got all that guaranteed money there. And that's something I would be looking at if I was Chris Jones and his agent. Now, the downside is this. What if Kansas City decides just to let me sit for a year? I don't think they would do that. I don't think Kansas City, but some teams have. We watched the Steelers let Le'Veon Bell do that. We watched, I think the Washington Redskins do that with their left tackle, I think it was Williams, do that, sit out for almost a season or part of a season, and really you're missing a whole season of your playing career. Maybe you can make it up on the back end, maybe not. You never really know for sure. But even besides that, you just have the absence of getting to be in the locker room. You don't get to be there with your teammates. You don't get to enjoy another Super Bowl run. There's a lot of pressure from the media, a lot of pressure from fans, a lot of pressure from organizations, a lot of pressure from all over the place, a lot of criticism about why is this guy sitting out a year? Why doesn't he just go ahead and sign the contract that the team's being offered? Why doesn't he go ahead and play under the franchise tag? It's not so simple as just threatening to sit out a season. But if I'm Chris Jones's agent, I'm very much going to look at that and try to use that to get Kansas City to come on through here with the deal. If I'm Kansas City, I'm not totally sure I want to bring back Chris Jones at a cap figure of $20 or $22 million a season. If I have Chris Jones at $20 million a season, and I have Frank Clark at $22 million a season, and I have Patrick Mahomes at $40 million a season, I've already spent $90 million a season during 2021 and 2022, and it's going to be really hard to try to field a roster in which I really need 30 guys to step up and compete and fill out starting spots, okay? That really gets hard after you've given, I don't know, 40% of your cap to 3 players. So that really gets to be difficult, and you really have to step up and think about the big picture. A lot going on there with this Chris Jones deal. It's always a lot more to it than what you really want to hear and read about. Usually folks either want to take the Chiefs side or take Jones' side. There's not a side to take here. It's just a lot of things to consider in the big picture. And so with Chris Jones here, the ironic part is this. The Chiefs are tight on cap space. It's not brutally tight. They've got a good roster coming back no matter what they do. With Chris Jones this season, they could actually have more cap space if they re-signed him to a new deal and didn't use the franchise tag, because a lot of times what you see, and this isn't always, but a lot of times what you see when teams negotiate a new contract, the first season is kind of a discount year. So instead of getting $15 million this season, you might see Chris Jones get $11 or $12 million this offseason, and then ratchet it up to the $22 million mark each year after that. For instance, we saw that with the Frank Clark contract. During 2019, he had a new deal. He had all the guaranteed money in place, but that first year, 2019 cap number was somewhere around, I think, $7 million, just a real discount. And then, of course, this year, he jumps all the way up to $22 million in year 2 of his contract. So, ironically enough, by franchising Chris Jones and trying to get a better deal long term, they actually, if they end up sticking with the franchise tag, created a little bit more of a salary cap pinch this year than they would have if they were trying to go ahead and get into a long-term contract. So there's a lot to consider there, a lot of back and forth. We'll see what the Chiefs do. I feel very certain Chris Jones will be on the Kansas City roster this year, but we'll see what happens there. We'll see how much they try to get. If I'm Chris Jones, I'm going to get every dollar I can. And so would most of the rest of us. I mean, it's easy to look at a guy and say, why can't you be happy with $15 million a season? You only get one chance in your lifetime to sign a deal this big. If you play any position besides quarterback, you really only get one chance in the NFL to sign a contract that is this big. He may get another big contract later on in his career, but it would probably be at about a 3-year deal, probably for a little bit less guaranteed money, probably a lower cap rate, because he would be 5 years older at that point. So you really only get one chance to sign a deal this big and make this much money. And so if I'm Chris Jones, even though I love Kansas City, I love the organization, and I love Mahomes, and I love getting to play for Super Bowls, I'm going to try to get every dollar I can, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's everything right with that in the economy that we live in. So I encourage that. But I don't blame the Chiefs at all for what they're trying to do here. I'd be doing the same thing. I'd be asking the exact same questions about where do we place a value on Chris Jones in terms of us being able to compete for Super Bowls. Not sell tickets and go 8-8 like some certain other organizations in the NFL, but actually compete for Super Bowls every year. After that, the importance and the talent level of these decisions really drops off. This is really the only big, huge decision Kansas City has to make this year. Everybody else either comes into, yeah, they were a starter, but they're starting to face age, or they weren't a starter, but they had a lot of snaps this offseason. When you come in here, Kendall Fuller and Bashaud Breeland. Breeland was signed as a free agent last offseason. I think he made $1 million, $1.5 million. He didn't play that well, but the important part for Breeland was that he did play. And so coming off of an injury in 2018, if you're Bashaud Breeland, even though you didn't look particularly great, you did play, and you played a lot of snaps. So my guess is that Breeland is probably going to shoot to the free agent market. I really don't think, based on the way he played in 2019, I don't think that we're going to see Kansas City try to re-sign him. I think Breeland is going to go the way of free agency, and I think make a lot more than $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million, whatever it is he made this season. I think that the desire for cover corners is that big, and I think the cap space that they have is going to kind of push them out of bringing back Breeland, especially considering he didn't play all that great this year anyway. He was fine. He contributed. He kind of sort of held down a spot there at cornerback. When you look at where they are at safety here on the needs board, they were great at safety. They were really good at safety this year with Matthew, and then with the rookie Juan Thornhill this year. So they are locked in at safety for the next couple of seasons. You would like to try to upgrade here at cornerback. I don't necessarily see them bringing back Breeland because, like I said, now that he's shown that he can be back on the field and play a lot of snaps, I think he'll make more money as a cover corner with some other team. Kendall Fuller here is the guy who really plays more of the slot nickel. He's been very solid year in and year out. He's not a star, but guys who can cover in the NFL, they have a great value. And for Kansas City, I've got them right here at cornerback on the needs list. I've got them kind of in the black color. I've got this color coded, sorry. Green is good, black is average, and red is bad. So here at cornerback, you've got a group here who was solid, but they weren't great, and having Chris Jones there at the defensive line and having the safeties there to cover last year really took a lot of pressure off the cornerback position, and having Charvarius Ward there at corner, who played solid last year, especially considering the amount of draft pick you had invested in him, which I think was a 5th rounder. That you were solid there at cornerback, but you would like to upgrade there, especially moving forward. You would like to just get better. So I think if Fuller isn't going to cost too much, and I don't think that necessarily he will because he's in that slot role, but we'll see. Kansas City may have to let him go as well. So to me, there's a big question mark about just how much money Kendall Fuller can get on free agency. Most of these guys, we can kind of peg it down. How much does the NFL value a cover guy who's in that slot, who's kind of in that slot nickel role? As valuable as cover guys are, again, he's in that slot cover role, and he's not an automatic starter, but he's shown the ability to kind of sort of hold down that starting spot there. So we'll see if they can bring him back. I kind of doubt that they'll bring Breeland back. Terrell Suggs, this is a guy that a lot of NFL teams just completely passed on, didn't even stop to consider. And Kansas City brought him on, and he played really well, and he played a lot of snaps. And so this is a guy I think that Kansas City would love to have back, but I don't think they're going to be able to afford him. And again, you can always find the money for any one player that you want to bring back. In Kansas City's case this year, they could find the money for everybody. But do you really want to lay out a lot of money for Terrell Suggs, who age and injury is a concern, moving forward when you know in 2021 the cap is fixing to get a lot more complicated and a lot more difficult to try to compete? Do you really want to lay that money out there for Terrell Suggs? And I think the answer is no. So for me, I really doubt that you'll see Terrell Suggs come back this year, even though I'm sure Kansas City would love to have him on the roster. I think he played so well, I think he's going to get probably another 2 or 3 year deal, probably a 2-year deal in free agency, and make more money than Kansas City really wants to lay out for him over the next couple of off seasons. Now, Over here with Ogba. Ogba really struggled this season. He contributed. He was a guy who was in the rotation there at defensive end, at the edge spot. He did contribute, but this was not a guy who showed in any way that he could really have the potential to lock down a starting spot. So I would be surprised if Kansas City brings him back. I think that he's going to get more money in free agency than Kansas City is really even interested in trying to offer him anyway. If they could bring him back as a rotation guy at $1 million or $2 million, they might consider it, but I don't think. I think other teams who are more desperate for edge guys than Kansas City is, who's already paying $22 million to Frank Clark, I just don't see any way that they're going to bring back Ogba at the amount of money that probably some other teams who are desperate for anybody at edge rush or anybody there at the defensive end spot would be willing to pay Ogba. Mike Pennell, this is a guy right here. But again, I think this is a kind of a quiet, underrated guy in the NFL, and there are a few of those. I think Mike Pennell is one of them. I think this is a guy who probably, I think more teams would have benefited from having him on their roster at defensive tackle last season. Kansas City had him. Didn't necessarily need him because they had Chris Jones there and because they had pretty good depth there with Xavier Williams and Derek Nottie at defensive tackle. Again, nobody there really strong enough to step up and grab a starting spot, but lots of good rotational guys. If you're the Kansas City Chiefs, you don't necessarily have to bring back Pennell, but I think you could probably get him for less than a lot of other teams are willing to pay. The price for defensive tackles is lower than it is for edge rushers right now. Right now, the price for edge rushers is way up here. It's at a ridiculous number. And so I think you could possibly bring back Pennell as a rotational guy. I think they're going to lose Xavier Williams. I didn't even put him on the board. I think Xavier Williams would be gone. I think Derek Nottie's contract runs out in a season or maybe 2 seasons, I forget which. Derek Nottie has not shown the ability to step up and grab that starter spot. If for some reason you anticipate some kind of negotiation troubles with Chris Jones, it would be really nice to have Mike Pennell here. But we'll see what Kansas City feels about that. They may not have any interest in bringing him back, but this is a guy who plays solid, who can eat a lot of snaps, who I think he was with the New York Jets the season before, looked good over there on their defensive line. This is a guy who I think could conceivably hold down a starting spot at defensive tackle if he were given the chance, if Kansas City needed him to do that. So this is a guy I would be interested in bringing back. We'll see what Brett Veach and Andy Reid feel about that. They may feel completely the opposite. Anthony Sherman, here's a guy, fullback, everybody likes to talk about fullback as being non-existent. Well, there are certain teams that still use the fullback spot and use it very well. We had 2 of them in the Super Bowl this year, San Francisco and Kansas City. They don't use fullback a lot. I think he only got 120 snaps this season, but he is a very nice tool, and I think probably for about $2 million you could get Anthony Sherman back, and this is a guy that just allows you in those short yardage situations, those running downs in the NFL, it allows you to really bring a hammer, which is what everybody used to do in the old days. You go back to the 80s and the 70s, everybody and their grandma used to know you had to have a fullback to create a hole in the NFL. The NFL just isn't built that way anymore, but it's a nice option to have. In an era where as offenses you're just trying to any way to out-leverage the defense, I think it's worth it to bring back Anthony Sherman, so I think we'll see him back. Let's get to Wisniewski here at guard. Wisniewski's a great question. Wisniewski stepped up, played a lot of snaps for Kansas City, played even more as the year went along. We saw Andrew Wiley struggle with injuries throughout the year. Don't know how healthy Wiley ever got. He was called a healthy scratch for Super Bowl, but I don't know how healthy he ever was. Kansas City didn't need him because Wisniewski stepped up and played so well. Now, how much money did you start to offer Wisniewski? We already know we're tight on cap space this year. We're going to be tighter on cap space next year. How much money do we want to offer Wisniewski before he's just outpriced himself out of our range capability? Lots of need for offensive linemen in the NFL, and Wisniewski has not necessarily played a lot of games over the past 4 or 5 seasons, hasn't started a lot of games, but he sure played good for us last season. And with some other concerns that we have at guard, things we're thinking about, do we want to offer Wisniewski? Do we want to bring him back? Wiley's probably coming back at guard. If we want to, we can have Dr. Tardif there at guard if we decide. So we don't have to have Wisniewski back. but there are some other ways we could do things. And do we want Wisniewski back? And I think the Wisniewski question is this: how much money can he get on free agency? And I think that's a really big question, because like I said, Wisniewski played really well for Kansas City down the stretch this year. Played a lot of snaps, started a lot of games, really fit in well. He's tough. He moved well. He did good both in pass blocking and run blocking. He was a valuable asset, probably just as valuable an asset as Terrell Suggs was over on defense. What an asset. But age and injuries get to be a concern with Wisniewski, and you have the added question mark of the previous 4 seasons. I think he only played about half of his games, maybe less, even started half of those games. How effective will he be going forward, and can we pay him the kind of money he's probably going to get on free agency? And I think not. I think Wisniewski, I think there's enough of a thirst out there in the NFL for guys who can plug in and start somewhere, and there are enough horrible, absolutely horrible offensive lines where other people just need to sign somebody to fill a gap for a season or two. Wisniewski could be that guy, and so I think Wisniewski has probably outpriced himself. But this is a guy who, if I'm Kansas City, I would love to bring back in a heartbeat. I just don't know if it's going to be worth the financial maneuverings to get him the price that he's going to want based on how well he played this season. Shady McCoy, here's a guy at running back. You have running back by committee. I don't think that Kansas City necessarily needs to bring back McCoy. I think they would like to maybe draft a guy who's younger, shows more promise in the years to come. But certainly McCoy was a guy, you heard talk about speed this year on Kansas City's offense. In reality, Kansas City was basically the same offense in 2019 as they were in 2018. The only 2 guys they added in terms of weapons in 2019 were Shady McCoy and then the draft pick Mecole Hardman. So Mecole Hardman was a definite upgrade to the depth at wide receiver. They definitely got faster there. And with McCoy, this is the only other player you had that made you any faster last year. The difference was you actually won the Super Bowl in 2019, and so everybody starts to talk about speed. Really, it was not a drastic difference from 2018 to 2019. There was a subtle difference with having McCoy and Hardman there speed-wise. What you really just had was they just finally won the Super Bowl, and they did so with Hardman and McCoy. So the question becomes here, do you want to offer McCoy to come back? He's a year older. Yes, he can contribute. Can you get him back at $2 or $3 million? You probably could. I think there's enough other considerations here and enough other needs and enough of a cap space. I think you're probably going to see Kansas City just address this through a draft or through bringing in a cheaper free agent. So I think McCoy is probably gone into free agency. But again, we'll see how Kansas City feels about that. They may view that very differently. And last, Robinson here at wide receiver. Robinson's the guy who can come and go from Kansas City. Probably get him for cheap. I would think you could probably bring him back for about $2 million. But you never know how another team is going to view that. So we'll see if Kansas City decides to bring him back. This is not a starting wide receiver, but he is a nice guy to have on the roster because of his speed. He runs his routes decent. This is a nice guy to have here as somewhere adding depth for you. We'll see if Kansas City wants to do that or not. Now, those are the individual free agents. Let's look quickly at the need spots for Kansas City. You look right here at quarterback, Green, they're good. Got the best quarterback in the NFL. Got the best quarterback in the NFL for the next several years going forward. Hard to see anybody being any better than Mahomes moving forward for the next few seasons. Wide receiver, you're good, but you have a question mark what you're going to do there. Even if you decide to let go of Sammy Watkins, you still have 2 other guys with Hardman and Hill who can catch the ball. You have right here at tight end, you have Travis Kelce. So at the weapon spot, wide receiver and tight end, you are golden. Even if you decide to save cap space, and you've got it right here with Sammy Watkins, $14 million. Does that create a bit of a hole at wide receiver? Yes, but it's not something that can't be addressed through free agent veterans or through a high draft pick, like a first or second round draft pick. It's not something that couldn't be addressed based on Sammy Watkins' production. You couldn't match his potential, but you could match his production. through a cheaper way. So at wide receiver, quarterback, tight end, this is the strength of the team, no doubt about it. Mahomes, started with Mahomes and then fanning out the wide receiver and tight end. This is the thing that has fueled them for the past 2 or 3 seasons now, past 2 seasons now, being so good. AFC Championship game and the Super Bowl win. This is the strength of the team right here. At tackle, they're golden. You've got Eric Fisher. You've got Mitchell Schwartz there at the 2 tackle spots. You'd be very hard-pressed to upgrade there in any real way, unless you just got lucky and found a younger guy somehow. But they are set there at tackle. As far as guard and center goes, there's a number of different ways they can do it, but they have good options all the way around. If they decide to go cheaper and restructure and redo some deals or cut somebody, they can do that. But at the guard center spot, they're fine for now. As 21 gets here, sorry, as 2021 gets here in 2022, they really need to address that. I would love to see them address that through the lower rounds of the draft, the 3rd, 4th, 5th rounds. Get a little bit younger there, add some guys there at guard and center. But for now, this season, they were solid. They're good. They've got good things right there. Running back is really a place they could upgrade if they wanted to. If they want the team to get bigger, faster, stronger, whatever, catch the ball more out of the backfield, they could upgrade at running back. It would definitely not be too difficult to upgrade at running back, but Kansas City has been operating running back by committee now for several seasons, so I wouldn't necessarily expect to see them change that method of operation, but if they wanted to upgrade there, they could. Defensive tackle is a strength as long as Chris Jones comes back. You've got Chris Jones there, who's an absolute elite pass rusher there, and then after him you had Pennell if you decide to bring him back. You've also got Xavier Williams if you wanted to bring him back, Derek Knott if you wanted to bring him back. These are all decent rotational guys. However, if Chris Jones doesn't come back, if you decide to trade him, or you get in a contract dispute and he decides he doesn't want to play this season until you give him a big contract, and you don't want to give him a big contract, or at least not the contract that he wants, defensive tackle turns into a massive weakness, a massive hole in a hurry, because after Jones, you've got guys who are decent rotational guys, and if you don't bring back Pennell, it gets to be an even bigger hole. So that's just something to watch out for. This is something that could go from being a strength to being a weakness really quickly, depending on what you decide to do with Chris Jones and even Mike Pennell to that lower degree. Defensive end, they're fine there. Frank Clark there is the big money guy, and then you've got a few other guys that just kind of contribute. You could still find another edge rusher, and it would still be awfully handy. I don't think Kansas City's worried about that. They've got Jones and Clark. I don't think they're concerned about that at all. But this is a spot that they're solid at. Cornerback, we discussed that earlier. If you had the guys you had last year, which they're not going to, there's no way they're going to bring back the same cornerback core. But at CB, if you bring back Ward and you bring back Breland and you had Fuller there, that's a halfway decent cornerback. It's not something you're really worried about, because you got the safeties back there covering for them. You've got a pretty good defensive line there covering for them. But this is a place that you could definitely use an upgrade, and I would love to see Kansas City really start to focus at CB. This is a way to get the defense, which though it wasn't a weakness last year, it was the weaker part of the team. This is the way to get the defense to be even better, is to get a CB in there who's younger and faster and can really start to cover. You talk about Kansas City really starting to push up into the top 10 of NFL defenses. This would be a way to do it right there at CB, and those cover guys are so valuable. So I would love to see them try to find a way to keep Fuller, let Breland go, and then maybe use a first-round draft pick somehow to bring in a CB who's actually going to develop into something there at CB. Safety, of course, green there, all green there. Got Thornhill. Sorensen's there as your third guy. He's a guy who's got starting experience in the NFL. He's a guy who's very flexible, can cover, can tackle, can even slide down into the linebacking spot, depending on what we're asking linebackers to do these days. So at safety, you're great. Linebacker is beyond any doubt the weakest part of the Kansas City defense, the weakest part of the Kansas City team. Their depth at linebacker is atrocious. The talent level at linebacker is sorely lacking. There's a guy there with Neiman, Ben Neiman, I think his first name, who played solid last year at times, looked kind of decent in pass coverage, but seems to struggle in other areas of the game. Linebacker's not a super important spot in the NFL, so it's not anything Kansas City's worried about, but the cheapest and quickest way to get better on defense this offseason would be at linebacker. And so it starts to ask the question, this is important, I'll end with this. It's been a long video. If you're still hanging on, I appreciate it. We can talk all we want about signing Chris Jones or not signing him, about re-signing these other guys, about getting a draft pick. The question is, did we get better? How did we get better this offseason? And that is always the most important question. Sometimes you can lose a very good player and still get better if your draft picks hit, and if the way that you spread the money around has created fewer holes on defense. And right now you've got a real hole there at linebacker that could be addressed, and you could get stronger underneath against the run. If we get to working around for our cap savings, how are we going to do that? If I'm going to create money for Chris Jones, and if I'm going to create money for some of these other guys, or if I want to wander out there in the free agent draft, in the free agent pool, and pick out another high-priced guy, how do I go about that? Where am I going to get my money from? It's right here. These are your three guys that Kansas City would think about letting go, that they could save the most cap money on. Okay, and these are really the only three guys. Travis Kelce, you could save $9 million by letting him go. There's absolutely no chance that's going to happen, so I didn't even put him on the board. Eric Fisher, I think you could save $5, $6, $7 million in cap space by letting him go. He's a solid starting right tackle in this league. It's difficult to come by. There is no chance they're going to let Eric Fisher go this season, so I didn't even put him on the board. Outside of those two guys, there is nobody else that you could come anywhere near getting any of the cap savings from if you were to cut or trade them. Absolutely nobody else. These are the three guys. Sammy Watkins, if you were to cut him today, there would be a $7 million cap hit. That's pretty stout, a dead cap hit. But your cap savings would be $14 million. So you can do a lot with $14 million. Does it create a hole at the number 2 wideout spot? Absolutely. Is it something I can cover through maybe signing a veteran free agent or through the draft? Yeah, and then I can take that money, use that to spread it around and try to cover some other spots like linebacker. Dr. Tardif here, here's a guy, some fans would not even ever think of letting Dr. Tardif go. He has produced, he has been solid, but he has not been the same guy that we handed all the money to back in 2017. He just has not been the same guy. He is not the same player. Part of that's due to injuries. I don't know what the rest of it is, if that's fully explained by injuries or not. So you can make the argument that Dr. Tardif is overpaid. Some people don't like to pay guards in anyway. Andy Reid traditionally has not given a lot of money to guards throughout his career. He has at a couple of points. Dr. Tardif is one of those guys. If you wanted to release Dr. Tardif, that would create a $4 million dead cap hit for this season, but even after that, the cap savings would be $4.9 million. In other words, he's making $8.9 million this season. Even after that $4 million cap hit, I've still got $4.9 more million to play with. Now, does that create a hole at starting guard? Yes, it does. But if I could bring back Wisniewski, if I bring back Wiley, which I'm pretty sure they're going to, I don't see why they wouldn't, then I kind of got that filled out. I don't have to worry about that as much. So that's something they could think about. And then, of course, here with Sorensen, I told you how valuable he was as a cover guy. Need cover guys. Right now you've got him for $4.8 million, so he really adds that depth. But if you're scratching and clawing for a way to bring somebody else on the team, or to bring back one of these guys that you'd rather have instead of Sorensen possibly, maybe like a Fuller, okay, this is where the decisions really start to matter. This is where the money really starts to matter. This is where the money does not take care of itself. You have to make decisions, and every decision that you make affects what happens in 2021 and beyond. So, but if you wanted to, if you decided you wanted to let go of Sorensen, dead cap hit of $1 million. After that, you've got a clear cap savings of $3.8 million to play with. Those are the only three guys to get any significant cap savings from this year. How else could I do it? I could also do it by restructures, okay? Restructures is a popular way. Restructures are a very popular way in the NFL to create cap space in one season. A lot of teams do it all the time. Some teams do it wrongly because all they're trying to do is very desperately try to keep a couple of guys on the team, and they go right back to 8-8 that season and the following season. So some teams don't know what they're doing with the restructures, and some teams very well know what they're doing when it comes to restructures. Don't be surprised if you're watching Kansas City if they don't go to Frank Clark and do a restructure. Don't be surprised if they don't go to Travis Kelce and try to do some kind of a restructure or some kind of an extension, even though he's got 2 more years left. They've got the leverage there. Don't be surprised if they don't go to Tyreek Hill, even though he just signed a new deal last offseason, and try to give him more guaranteed money in order to get the cap number down, or get the cap number down for this season. They've got a number of guys. They could do the same thing, I think, with Eric Fisher if they wanted to. Try to offer him some more guaranteed money, get that cap number down. So there's a number of ways, if they want to, for this season. The danger with that is there's always a give and take, always. I don't care what economy model you're looking at, all right? It can be a communist model, a socialist model. It can be our somewhat free market economy that we have here in the United States, somewhat. Or it can be a very closed economy like we have here in the NFL. It's a very closed, very tight economy that the NFL guys have. You cannot turn off one spigot without turning on another. You cannot move one domino without changing a number of others. So if you do decide to let one of these guys go by trade or cut, or if you decide to go through the restructure route, or you decide to bring one of these guys back, it always makes things different for 2021 and for 2022. In fact, it makes your cap hit, it makes your salary cap tighter in the years ahead. It gives you less flexibility. Now, I haven't looked ahead. I don't know what their cap space is, their commitments are for 2021. We know right now they've got everything committed except for $16 million in this season. So, for instance, if you look ahead the next off season and you say, well, right now they've got $60 million still available for 2021. Well, a lot of that's going to get eaten up by Patrick Mahomes' contract, even if they backload it. And then if you look at them adding Chris Jones back in for a total of $18 to $20 million, and then got Frank Clark. Well, Frank Clark would already be added in. But if you add in the restructures where that guaranteed money gets pushed off to 2021-22, you really start to back yourself into a corner in terms of cap flexibility. So that's just all things they've got to look at. If you're still hanging on to the video by now, I'm surprised that you're still here after 46 minutes. It is so good to see you today. Hope you're doing well. Thank you for hanging with us. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.